This is Functional and Fabulous, the omnichannel podcast, where we unbox tales of online retail and digital transformation.
In this episode, Jer goes in search of questions.
Great, we have all the big data, but what questions are we trying to answer?
Our guest has the questions.
What do they look like? Where do they live? How often do they shop with me? What is it that they like? And then I'm going to use that information to give them more of what they want.
The Functional and Fabulous Soapbox Racing Team is born.
Can we, for a second, just talk about dash cards?
You thinking about getting into one and being pushed down a hill?
Gordon describes dash cart propulsion.
Massive shoulders and big arms.
Jer questions his hearing.
What is a body buddy? Did I hear that correctly?
And the real threat of AI is exposed.
You feel all of a sudden kind of like shamed by an AI because you've no idea what it's talking about.
This episode of Functional and Fabulous is brought to you with pride by Studio 49, retail e-commerce experts, omnichannel growth consultants, and cut-through performance marketing specialists. Studio 49, where your digital retail success is built.
Hello and welcome to Functional and Fabulous, the omnichannel e-commerce podcast. We're delighted to welcome our guest today, Miya Knights. Miya is a retail tech publisher, an occasional author, and a consultant and advisor. She has over 25 years' experience specialising in enterprise technology use in retail, and she spent this time covering and analysing the demands and challenges faced by retailers to identify the technologies that best support their needs as consumer expectations and behaviours become ever more complex. It's always good to speak to someone who has written the book on a topic, and in this case Miya has co-authored two books that are extremely relevant to our subject matter. Omnichannel Retail, How to Build Winning Stores in the Digital World, with Tim Mason, the CEO of Eagle Eye and former Deputy CEO of Tesco plc, and Amazon, How the World's Most Relentless Retailer Will Continue to Revolutionise Commerce, co-authored with Natalie Berg. Miya, it's so lovely to have you here with us today.
Lovely to be here, Gare. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to the podcast. It's great to be able to talk to you today. We're really looking forward to it.
Likewise, Gordon. Thank you so much, both of you, for having me.
So, Miya, as someone who has written a book on Amazon, I guess you hear people make much ado about the potential end of Amazon whenever they have a stutter or a misstep. And I've heard you say, it's not the end, but only the beginning of the end of day one. Would you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. But to unpack it and answer it, I have to probably give a bit of context, don't I, for your listeners. So Jeff Bezos famously wrote in a shareholders letter that in order to be disruptive, to maintain the position in the industry that they have attained and be as disruptive as they have been in the past, and also remain nimble and agile enough to be disruptive and innovative, that they must treat every day that they come into work as though it was day one, the first day in the company. And so it's become kind of a bit of a term for referring to them as being disruptors and innovators. And I think, we've seen just, on one half, Amazon is a tech firm. On the other hand, it's a retailer, and we've seen both sectors, fare differently through the last three or 4 years through the pandemic. We've seen big tech squeezed quite heavily as we've sort of come out of the pandemic, and they perhaps, overhired a little bit, and their ranks swelled and their spending swelled through the pandemic to meet demand for everything going online and our appetites growing for digital. But at the same time, it's being a tech company first, as I always say, and a retailer second. It's also really been able to use that tech savvy digital know-how to turbocharge its retail business and do really, really well as a retailer. So we've seen traditional bits of its business that have been growth engines, like its cloud services business, AWS,
Mhm.
continue to grow, although growth is now slowing as adoption grows worldwide and competition increases. And on the retail side, we've seen them grow their advertising business hugely from a profit perspective. It's got massive margins. So it's done really, really well there, but it's also been caught out with too much warehouse space, too many staff. It's having to kill off areas like Alexa, or at least slim them down, trim them down. Maybe it's not learning as fast as it used to, or failing as fast as it used to. The experience, even though the ads business is great for shareholder news and investor coverage, but it doesn't actually make the experience a lot better for consumers.
Mhm.
I think the jury is out on whether or not these ads are actually going to add value.
Mhm.
So in terms of Amazon being able to pivot, be an innovator, be a disruptor, really tune into what the customer wants and reflect it really quickly in their front end, marketplace, Amazon.com and Prime businesses, they're starting to slow down a little bit. I think the last couple of things that sort of our challenges, and have been perennial ongoing challenges, have been getting into food and getting into fashion. I mean, they're still a massive apparel retailer, particularly in the States. They're the number one. But luxury fashion, they're still trying to, struggling to penetrate. The likes of Shane, for example,
Mhm.
adjacent, so they're not necessarily competing against each other. But when you think about that fast fashion side, you wouldn't buy a t-shirt from Amazon, buy some jogging bottoms from Amazon, but you wouldn't necessarily go out and buy a party dress or dress shirt from Amazon necessarily,
Yeah.
unless the brand already sells. So there are all these headwinds, as well as the policy and regulation one, which we should always mention. That means that it might not quite be end of day one for Amazon, but I believe it's sunsetting, and we're starting to see Amazon, the mature retailer and tech company, head into its day two phase.
Such a clear answer to my question. Actually, I've often, we've thought about this idea of how a large innovative company, how do you manage to generate or continuously generate that innovation on an ongoing basis, in particular from within the company. And obviously there comes a point where things start to slow down a little bit, or there's a reinvigoration, or maybe a sunset of some portions of it for a sunrise the next day. They made a lot, they made much ado about going into grocery in the States and in the UK, and obviously in the States, Whole Foods was a very strategic purchase. But the business there seems to have abated quite a bit as well. They were very, they were quite bullish going into it. In some cases, they probably wrote the PR before they actually succeeded in the area. How do you find that? Do you think that that's a true statement?
Yeah, that's a fair estimation of where they are. I mean, again, let's set some context. Amazon's a massive retailer in everything that's non-food, but we spend 40% of all retail spend is food. It's the biggest category, and they want to see what we buy food. I mean, when you think about the advantages that grocers have from a perspective of that digital pandemic, turbocharged pandemic digital demand, they have frequency. They see who's a young family, who's grandparents, who likes to buy baby sham at Christmas, all of these kinds of nuances of our shopping habits. And I think Amazon has the ability to see everything else apart from that. And it's a missing piece when we talk about omnichannel, for example. Getting that 360-degree view of the customer is not just where they shop with you, but also what they shop with you. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that, as a shirt retailer, you're going to want to know my inside leg measurement, but at the same time, it pays to have that, I suppose, as detailed a view of who is buying from you, so that you can give them more of what they want, infer what they want before they want. So Amazon's ambitions in grocery are clear, in terms of the benefits that they're looking to gain. 40% of our spend and 40% of everything we buy, and knowing how we do that. The acquisition of Whole Foods has been seen as a bit of a damp squib. I do believe Amazon, being a tech company first and a retailer second, has had to learn how to retail along the way. And grocery is one of those. It's probably the hardest sector to get into. America, it's very fragmented. You've got a lot of regional banners. in Britain, it's one of the most fiercely competitive
Yeah.
and consolidated
Were they
markets in the world.
overconfident in their ability? You know, I mean, Amazon
Yes.
obviously as a they've been enormously successful, but as you say, grocery is really challenging.
Yeah, I'd like. It would be great to get your opinion, Maya, on whether you think that that's because they didn't have the technology right, or what is the reason that this has underdelivered, and is it, as you say, down to their retail skill set?
I think that's largely got a lot to do with it. I mean, when you're talking about the retail skill set, let's deal with that first. You know, they don't have a brand that's known and trusted for food. I don't think the proposition, you know, they didn't necessarily. Whole Foods wasn't the best run grocer in the world. They inherited some inventory systems that weren't great. Um, so retrofitting core retail systems, which they didn't really have to build in for a store environment into Whole Foods, was, I think, from a due diligence perspective, something they potentially overlooked. And I think what a good way of thinking about it perhaps is that Amazon sees stores the way that traditional store-based retailers saw online 10 to 15 years ago. You know, it's something over there. We can operate it as a different, in terms of the integration of Whole Foods, the spinning out of innovation into Whole Foods and retail skills and savvy back into Amazon. I don't think that integration happened as quickly or as well as it should, as quickly as it should have, or as well as it should have. And they underestimated how much retrofitting they would need to do to Whole Foods to get it up to the same kind of spec and standards as Amazon was running its own retail businesses. And then on the other hand, the things that they wanted to do from a test and learn perspective with Whole Foods that we now see in their Just Walk Out technology, in their Amazon Go format stores, is the price point. It's one of those things where I hesitate to say it's a technology waiting for a problem to solve. It really isn't. But it's like, I was having this conversation earlier, I was saying to somebody else, it's like where RFID was 7 to 10 years ago in terms of business case, ROI, and that's got a lot to do with just the cost of the tech. So they were very innovative, very disruptive. I think the technology has absolute application legs beyond, you know, this is the way forward for shopping in stores. We don't need tills anymore. They've proven it. It eliminates shrink. You know who's coming into your store. You can match the digital identity to the human physical shopping trip, for example. But the cost of doing it has really limited them. So that's why we see it only rolled out to local and convenience type formats with smaller footprints. You know, they're experimenting with. I'm answering your question, Gare, about food, but you know, they've started to think about how to do this in department store environments as well, how to modernize, disrupt, remove friction from the store's buying experience. But the technology that they've come up with is proving really, really difficult to scale quickly. But the final thing I'll say on grocery is, I would say, instead of watching what has happened with Whole Foods, watch what they're doing with their own banners. And the Amazon grocery stores that they are now rolling out in America have the new redesigned Dash Cart, which allows for bigger buys, so bigger format stores, bigger ranges, which allows them to start to build that brand cachet around the actual, you know, shopping experience. What brands do you have? You have what I'm looking for. You know, it's not just like in the UK, Morrison's groceries. I have a choice. I have local brands, and I have Amazon owned brands, and I have other premium brands as well. That's what customers are used to. That's what they're looking for. So you need the bigger format stores to do that. Dash Cart's getting them there, although I am seeing some interesting competitors coming out with, you know, systems that you retrofit to shopping trolleys that could, you know, compete head to head with them. It's not, you know, buying tech from Amazon, which means, you know, necessarily giving away all your data as well, sharing all your data as well.
Maya, for those people who are listening that aren't familiar, could you just give us a headline of what a dash cart is?
Oh, so a dash cart is the Just Walk Out technology that's in Go stores uses computer vision and shelf sensing technology to basically track you in an anonymized way around the store, and when you pick something up off the shelf and put it in your bag and walk out with it, you're automatically charged. The dash cart does exactly that, but in a shopping trolley form. So it's like all the cameras and all the sensors are in the trolley. So as you drop something in the trolley, that's the cue for the artificial intelligence systems to log it as something that's gone into your basket. And as you leave the store, that's the cue for it to charge your payment instrument that you've registered to the app.
Got it. So in convenience, it's looking at the shelves. In the larger formats, it's in the trolley.
Well, I think they'll certainly have the computer vision and sensing technology in the bigger format stores as well, because you've got bigger basket shops. Just built braces, I think. But the dash cart is the point at which all that stuff's tallied, and because it's a bigger shop, it allows them to give you a screen that gives you a running total, which you're more familiar with the scanning guns in supermarkets now as well. It gives them that sort of digital media capability as well, because you're pushing a cart rather than just putting stuff in a bag and walking out from a convenience perspective.
And tot up your multi-buy discounts, as we all like to do as we're running around certain supermarkets with our scan and go guns.
I heard you use a great expression. With online, the lower the touch, the more tools you need to try and bridge the gap digitally. And I've certainly seen situations where retailers are trying to deliver totally seamless and frictionless services, or at least that's the aim. But then they're surprised by the planning effort and technology involved. And it's almost, when you were talking about Amazon and its experience in retail and retrofitting to Whole Foods and all of that, it was almost like the reverse version of it in a way. But looking to online, do you find that that's the case? The more that people are trying to make these things seamless, the more surprised sometimes they are by how complex that can be, and how difficult sometimes it is to keep things simple.
Yes, I would say, to answer your question twofold, let's break down what people are looking for from the online experience. We've been doing it long enough now to kind of start boiling it down to some essential tenets, and then how retailers can deliver on that. I think the essential tenets are, particularly now from a give to get dynamic perspective, when we're talking about digital and the footprint that we leave and the click streams that we create and the data that we therefore share, and the information we infer through that data that we then share with the retailer. There is, I think the overarching thing now, particularly from an omnichannel perspective, is recognise and reward me for my continued custom. Mm-hmm. Don't treat me like I'm a one-time anonymous customer. So make it worth my while to log in, make it worth my while to identify myself when I'm in store. When I'm there, even if I'm not a regular customer of yours and I'm not on your loyalty scheme, I'm not logged in, but I'm just browsing, the search, browse and discovery phases of the shopping journey now have to be, get me to what I'm looking for as quickly as possible. Don't make it difficult for me to find what I'm looking for. And then the final and third tenet has to be, once I've found it, give me the confidence to buy something that I know is going to be what I want. And that there becomes, again, where the data can really help infer what is the mission, what's the real value. Is it speed? Is it quality? Is it quantity? What is it about this person that I already know from their shopping habits, known or unknown, that they've shared with me, that can help me get to that, bridge that conversion gap? We can talk about fashion, we can talk about returns. Why are people buying 3 sizes of something when, if you could show them that it would fit them, give them the confidence that it would fit them, they'd buy 1 size. So I try, and that's what people come to me for. They try for me to boil these things down, and it is recognise and reward me, mm-hmm. help me find what I'm looking for as quickly as possible, and give me the confidence to buy it, knowing mm-hmm. that it has the value that you tell me it has. And that then you get into a whole sort of discussion about brand value and purpose and sustainability mm-hmm. and fast versus slow deliveries. But there are so many different ways that you can do that, meet those 3 demands, that I think the last 15 years have been characterized by retailers going, well, I'll just buy an e-commerce platform, slap that mm-hmm. in, and it should do it all. Yep. But when you are now talking about recognise and reward me, you're talking about loyalty, yep. linked to maybe payment system, payment delivery, location, inferences from data points from customers. When you're talking about search, browse, discovery, you really are talking about shoppertainment. You're talking about video. You're talking about embedding video. Are you making your video on your mobile app shoppable? Are you using something like the Zara store app, where I can nominate my favorite 3 shops, where you'll make the inventory available to me if I click and collect in an hour? And that then bleeds into, at the end, am I using something like Aftership or Quiver to make sure I'm offering you a slow delivery, or make sure that I'm giving you step by step your product is 5 steps away, much as less as just before that we talked about, am I using an AR fitting tool? Am I using, body buddies? Am I using video? Am I using live streaming from the conversion consideration set perspective? So all of these little but significant components need to be bolted onto these systems. And I think I see what's happening to sort of round up what's probably a really long response to your question, yeah, but is that these amorphous e-com platforms can't quite keep up.
Well,
and we're seeing that's it's platform play versus best of breed, right? It's always been the way, and right now platform is holding a lot of retailers back.
For me, this is super interesting, because on the one hand you have this tech giant, Amazon, building its own tech and implementing that into physical environments, and some retailers may look overwhelmed. And I noticed from your Twitter feed, there was a great quote from Reggie Schultz, from the CEO of JD Sports, saying, "Don't do code, we do stores and customer experience. Let the tech companies do the code." And you gave that one a high five. And that resonated with me when I saw it, because this is an overwhelming level of capability for a retailer to try and take on and build. And I think I can't remember how many applications you just referenced in that couple of minutes, but there's a lot in that stack, and it kind of leads me into ask you a little bit more about that, of how do you build that kind of best of breed versus flexible components? How do retailers even start thinking about this?
Well, I mean, I've been doing this, to admit, over 25 years. And, just at the time when sort of POS was moving to client server, and then subsequently we've moved it up to the cloud. If you're at the bleeding edge, there are some retailers that have 37-year-old POSes who shall remain unnamed. And they are really proving huge barriers to innovation. So we're talking the e-com platform now kind of taking the place of the POS platform in stores and becoming the barrier to innovation. And back then it was all best of breed. I want best of breed everything. And then they realized they couldn't sew it all together. And then you had Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, Salesforce come in and say, well, you're buying your databases off of us. You're buying, your IBM X, whatever it might be. Why not? I've got some applications. We've got all the money to throw at verticalizing this, buying up all of these vertical applications and locking you in. And so retailers at that time, I think, through the 90s and the early noughties were like, yeah, all right, I'll have a bit of SAP. I'll have a bit of, and they were quite happy at that time, because I think the pace of innovation, the pace of changing consumer demand hadn't become turbocharged by digital quite as much then. And so they were in a position where they could say, yeah, 3 to 5 years for ROI, that's fine, I'll take that. And it's just sped up. So what I'm seeing now is a little bit of a hybrid, where they have got these systems of record that are owned by the big platform, big tech players. And I always say omnichannel should be 3 systems of main record, and that should be as near real time for all of them. Where's your stock? And you don't necessarily need to know where it is at that moment, just when it moves.
Yep.
I want to know when it moves. If it's gone from a warehouse to a store, or it's on a truck, or I've handed it to a customer. Those are the main points that you need to know where it is. So that's stock/inventory. Then you need to know who your customers are. However you do that, you might need a loyalty scheme, might not. And 3, you need to know what you're selling, and that might be sales and orders. And so we've seen again, one of the big ones, people sorted out their POS systems, then they put in e-com systems, they were doing telematics in the background, maybe 10, 15 years ago, order management. when I was at IDC. It was I need an order management system. I need to do click and collect. I need to bolt my store systems onto my e-commerce systems. And now you're trying to get retailers kind of going for, sales and orders coming from one stock pool, and dynamic orchestration and predictive analytics, where to keep my stock, for example. So they still need those three systems of record, right? But what's emerging on top from a best of breed perspective, I would say, maybe I'm going to sound like I've drunk Kool-Aid, but the best iteration of this I've seen so far is composable commerce. Throw a few buzzwords at you there. And, I think it's typified by the work that's being done by the Mac Alliance. So I work quite closely with a native mobile app firm called POC Commerce. They would hate me if I didn't actually name them, who onboarded to the Mac Alliance in 2021. So I got to look under the covers and see what the Mac Alliance needed for this vendor to join this members association. And they literally have to show their code. They have to work on blueprints, integration. And the Mac Alliance essentially stands for, and then I'll sort of hopefully finish answering your question in terms of having that platform systems of record, but hot swappable composable components on the top from the customer facing perspective that gives you that agility, is that they are all microservices, written in microservices with API first, cloud native and headless capabilities. So that's what the Mac stands for. And I do appreciate that the Mac Alliance doesn't just go, give us subscription money, we'll slap your logo and stuff. You have to go through quite a rigorous assessment process with the existing members on their technical council. And Google's only just been onboarded, for example. Google has only just joined the Mac Alliance. I think companies like Salesforce and Oracle will struggle to prove that they can join the Mac Alliance. And that's a good test. So whether something is Mac enabled and allows that level of composability on the front end while you manage the systems of record on the back end, I think is the happy medium that we're converging towards now.
Okay, so I suppose you could kind of, I've got to simplify it for my own understanding a bit here. So it's kind of like those systems of record, there are foundations, and they're the bits that stay constant, and then you can use, or retailers can then build experiences using composable elements to bring that experience to life for the customer, and that's how they can access the technology and also differentiate through the mix of technology that's right for them and their customer. If I've understood what you're saying correctly.
Yeah, exactly that. Thank you for simplifying it for me. Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. That's exactly how it should work, I think. It was interesting, that Reggie Schultz quote. He actually started off by saying, it took them, they were back and forth with their e-com provider about whether or not they needed a persistent basket. It's questions like that take too long to answer. Whereas if you're evaluating a new e-com platform, you can ask that question of 3 or 4 different Mac enabled providers and get the answer, and choose the answer that best suits you, because you're the retailer. You don't necessarily know what a persistent basket means, but if they can explain to you what it means, and you know your customer and you know the way they shop and you know what kind of business model, operating model you want to create online, then you can meet in the middle. So it makes those kinds of conversations a little bit clearer, a little bit easier. All of the big platform guys will make sure that they have an API layer that you can use and hook these things into. But it's things like dynamic search. It's things like, if I want to just swap out. So an unnamed retailer is currently migrating from ATG, which was bought by IBM years ago, and is unsupported. It's no longer supported. They're running their entire e-com business, and they're a former catalogue business. They don't actually have that many stores on something that's end of life, something that's no longer supported, simply because the operational risk of swapping that out right now is too big. So the idea is that they could move to, I try and be fair, you've got Shopify, BigCommerce, Fluent Commerce, all of these other e-commerce Mac-enabled systems of e-commerce systems, more quickly, more easily, without disrupting necessarily the plumbing underneath, the systems of record underneath, and having more business-focused and outcome-focused conversations rather than, getting mired in technical diagrams and, months, let alone years, to seeing returns and some
And
value. You can work in that incremental sort of
as a
way
question,
of getting quick
as a question in that
wins.
area, Maya, you know, I've often heard people speak of the desire to make data-driven decisions based on the 360-degree view of the customer, and you've mentioned that earlier. Um, do you feel like the knowledge and education is in the industry to leverage the potential of the tech that is available? And if not, what would you do about it, or what do you think can be done about it?
That's a really good question, Gare. One large UK department store has only just taken on a head of customer data. Only just.
Yep.
Has only just launched a loyalty scheme. You can probably infer which one it is. So, strategically, are they ready? Some not. I think those that have had loyalty schemes, we've seen them double down on them, and also maybe flatten them out a little bit in terms of their value, just from a cost of living crisis perspective. And I think they're probably, they've got first mover advantage. They already kind of understand the power of customer data. And so they are, the grocers, they're launching retail media networks. They're miles ahead.
Yeah.
I think the non-food guys are kind of just looking at marketplaces, that kind of thing, trying to they know they've got the eyeballs. How can I make my site more sticky? How can I start to join up my store, my view of customers in stores with my view of what they do online? I would say the big buzzword in regards to customer data is CDPs, customer data platforms. Do I need one?
If I had one, what would I do? Is
well, if you had one, what would you do with it? So,
well, I think sometimes that question, like there's a question of almost diving to the selection of a CDP ahead of the strategy around what would we do with it. It's kind of like the famous thing with big data. Great, we have all the big data, but what questions are we trying to answer?
Exactly. I mean, so we talked about big data, now we're talking about AI, aren't we, from that perspective? And I hear retailers all the time say that they're drowning in data. So you raise a very, very good point there. And I would suggest that you're drowning in data because you don't know what to ask of it. Yeah. Again, I would say, only ask what you need to know. The most fundamental thing retailers need to know from their customer data is, who is my best customer?
Yeah.
What do they look like? Where do they live? How often do they shop with me? What is it that they like? And then I'm going to use that information to give them more of what they want.
Yep.
And I'm going to also use that information to run my business better.
And sorry, I just we're getting a nod to wrap up shortly, but as a retail tech expert, couldn't possibly let you go without hearing your take on the future of retail in the world of artificial intelligence, which you've just mentioned. I saw a wonderful report recently on River Island's introduction of the smart fitting rooms, which could identify the products a customer brought with them to try on and would suggest via AI alternate sizing, colorways, recommended products that style with the items, and so on. What have you seen in the uses of AI that have really piqued your interest recently?
Oh dear. Sorry, that's not a good start to my response, is it? I'm not seeing anything particularly innovative. I'm seeing behind, not custom facing, I'm seeing so stuff that customers wouldn't necessarily see. But I heard a really good case study of AI being used to dynamically put clothing on models, so photography. So through the pandemic, samples wouldn't come through quickly enough, or an outfit might come through, the top comes through 2 weeks after the clothing. So if the supplier is sending you photography and you green screen photograph your models, companies like Looklet, they can dynamically put the photography onto the models and make it look like they're actually wearing it and replicate the drape and so on. So generative AI, we've seen all the deep fakes from a photographic perspective. That's being used in quite a clever way to merchandise to users. I know we're coming up to time, so my vision would be, depending on how much of that on that spectrum of give to get you are, walking into your local supermarket and then going, hey Maya, buy the app, because I've got my phone out now, right? The whole point about the book I wrote with Tim Mason of Tesco's was I can search for the nearest eggs, Google can take me turn by turn to the shop that sells the nearest eggs, but when I get to the shop I put my phone on. The pandemic's put pay to that. We all are quite happy to snap QR codes and have our phones out in stores. And that's across sectors. What are we doing with it when we've got the phones out now? What are retailers going to do? And I think, applying that reward and recognize, help me find what I'm looking for, make sure it's the thing that I want. It's walk into a supermarket. Hi, Maya, great to see you again. Are you here for a weekly shop? Are you here for? And then I maybe have toggles. Don't show me offers. Don't interrupt me. Do show me wayfinding capabilities. But I'm at the shelf edge and it says the scanning guns already do that. Are you sure we've got buy two get one free? You've not put two in you've only got two in your basket. But AI could go so far as to say, it looks like you're making spaghetti bolognese tonight. Do you know that the Tesco's own brand of Parmesan is half price versus the premium brand that you usually buy? And it's when you start to show value to consumers like that, you're saving me money, you're getting me in and out quickly. You could even say I'm in browsing mode. I'm not in convenience mode. As many questions as you want to ask of the customer to help them guide you into the kind of shopping experience you offer. AI can then dynamically match that from a promotions and personalization perspective and really start to make the mobile a real shopping assistant, both online and in store as far as the shopping experience is concerned. All of that is predicated on some pretty well joined up and AI turbocharged systems.
Yeah, that's a really, really nice use case kind of imagination or suggestion there. It sounds like a really well put together kind of an idea for what could be done with AI in the future.
Yeah, and I think final thing I'd say is, do you want to add an AR filter to that? Do you want me to give you turn by turn where you see the arrows as you walk around the shop? And then, my God, you point your phone at a shelf edge and you're seeing promotions pop up and stickers and banners. And again, I don't want to scare anybody because I know there's going to be people listening to this thinking that's my idea of fresh hell. But when you think about the fact that we do share so much data with retailers nowadays, and most of us do want to be treated better than a one-time cash-paying anonymous customer, and we have our mobiles out, depending on the use case, the mission, and the type of retailer you are and your brand value, all of these technology components can be used both in-store and online to both give customers more of what they want and to run your business better.
So more of what they want, better run businesses. I kind of wish we booked the studio for a few hours this afternoon to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing just like scraping the surface of some of the insight. And for those of you who are listening, you can buy Maya's books on Amazon, and I would say absolutely give her a follow on Twitter for some great insight into retail tech. And of course, there's your publication, Retail Technology News.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. No, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. As you said, we only scraped the surface and we're only at the beginning. I think I've been doing it for a long time. Things move slowly, but it's exciting times that we're in now, definitely.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Gare. Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks, Maya.
It's very hot, isn't it, Gordon?
Honestly, to quote Zoolander, Hansel is so hot right now. It's very hot in the studio. Wasn't that great, though? That was worth sitting in the unair-conditioned studio for, because Maya was fabulous. Some just brilliant insight across the board from the inner workings of Amazon right the way through to some of the developments around tech and really hitting on some of the brilliant basics that we've talked about throughout the season.
And one of the things that I found interesting is the three tenets that she took us through. So the recognize and reward your customer, help them find what they're looking for, and then assure them that it is the right thing. Those three tenets, the way she talked about them as if they were table stakes for online at the as things currently stand. But it's still, I think, a challenge for retailers to get to that level. I certainly think there are retailers that, let's say in the Irish context, where trying to get the loyalty going, it would be such a differentiator for them. And in Maya's mind, these are basically just like hygiene factors.
Mm.
And it's definitely, there's still quite a lot to be done in the world of tech for online.
Oh, completely. Inventory, customers, sales and orders. And then on top of that, once that's built and you've got that solid foundation, the brilliant basics, then you can start to build really exciting experiences, but only when you've got those basics locked in. And I suppose the other point is being really clear then on, once you've got that and once you are able to go and build an experience, what's that experience going to be? What are you asking that technology to do before you pick the technology and layer it out?
Yeah, exactly. So you're not going through a Me Too moment, because I suppose, it would be easy to look at a range of tech and say, well, look, we've got all of these solutions. We're not quite sure what our problem is. We'll just layer one of these solutions on top of it because we're sure that there's a problem somewhere. But rather than let's say running to the solution, trying to figure out what you're trying to do in the first instance.
And that can apply on so many levels. I had a really funny conversation this week with somebody, and they were comparing two email platforms. And one of them is very, very common. I'm not going to name any vendors, but one of them is really common in a specific tech stack, and the other one is less so. And he said to me, I'm not going to switch platforms here. And I was like, why not? And he was like, well, the price is pretty much of a muchness, but my team just prefer the UX of platform B over platform A. And I think that's a perfectly valid reason to choose a specific piece of technology if the capabilities are broadly the same, but your team find one easier to use to create better experiences for customers. Then pick the one that the team like to use, because they're going to be sitting in front of it all day.
Well, they have to make it happen.
Exactly. Now, can we, for a second, just talk about dash carts?
You thinking about getting into one and being pushed down a hill?
I just want to go. I just want to have a go of a dash cart. Because I actually said, for the benefit of our listeners, secretly, for the benefit of myself. I had no idea what one was, and now I'm like, I'd be putting stuff in, taking stuff out. Give me the 2 for ones.
Hiding it beside it, kind of like, will we get through it?
I would love to have a go of a dash cart.
Hey, I didn't want to mention it, but what is a body buddy? Did I hear that correctly?
I think that might be a software application.
Oh, okay.
Body Buddy. It could be like I'm guessing it's going to be like a TrueFit or a Fit Analytics. That kind of thing, but a bit more AR-y.
Yeah.
We were talking about that experience of what I would love it to be. And if anybody from Body Buddy's listening, you maybe want to give us a call. But in my head, what I would love it to be is an AR application that replicates the experience of when you go into a store. And for me, when I go into a menswear store, and the salesperson looks at me and goes, yeah, this is your size and this is what's going to suit you. Notice how I omitted what my actual size was.
Medium, I'm assuming. 32 waist.
Extra small. Extra small, 28 waist. Massive shoulders and big arms.
But and that goes back to what Matthew Brown was talking about on the let's say the intimate personal profile, or even this idea of, let's say, maybe even a digital kind of persona that you can go from store to store and say, okay, well, look, here are my sizes. This is my detail. Filter for me and find only the product that's going to suit me or the product that fits.
Yeah, I think that we can imagine that's the use case. Now let's go and find the technology.
But I really like the idea that Miya had around the use of AI, because it's a really nice, simple, but incredibly useful thing. This based on what's in your cart, it looks like you're making spaghetti bolognese. Would you like our half price Parmesan? I mean, like, AI it can sound so massively frightening for people, and yes, those are the sorts of leaps that generative AI is going to be able to make.
I love that use case. But then I was kind of then thinking how exciting to have based on what's in your shopping trolley. And if you think about back to episode 1, what Dean said about using loyalty to reward the behaviour that you want, And actually, if you've got AR plus AI, you can start upselling. So, I don't know, it looks like you're making spaghetti bolognese. You've got these tomatoes, but how about these organic Italian fabulous tomatoes that are going to make it taste like so much better? Chef's kiss.
Yes.
That would be a
great
maybe use case to make
maybe you
people
land in
better.
a situation where, the AI says, "Oh, it looks like you're making cacio e pepe," and you feel all of a sudden kind of like shamed by an AI because you've no idea what it's talking about.
You have to go and Google
I
it.
don't know. I was going to make like, pepper and cheese pasta. So what are you talking about, AI? Stop showing off.
Stop showing off or giving me the correct terms. I love the notions of that.
The Amazon side of things, I don't think we quite like. There was so much to unpack from what the conversation that we had, and there was so much detail in there, and so many, let's say, areas that we covered. But one of the areas I would have liked to get into was the Amazon brand, and whether or not the Amazon brand will carry Amazon into some of the areas it wants to go. Can Amazon food do grocery?
You want Amazon pasta?
Yeah.
Is the question.
Or
not pasta from the Amazon.
Or Amazon occasion wear.
Definitely don't want Amazon occasion wear.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that. But I wonder, like, Amazon own brand groceries. So if you think about the supermarkets that we have, like a Dunnes own brand.
Well, I'm thinking of Yellow Pack. I don't know if you had Yellow Pack in the UK. Did you? No.
I guess Tesco Value would have been the equivalent.
Maybe so. We had Yellow Pack and Morris. What was his name? It was it's a grocery store, Quinsworth. It's gone now, but we had this guy and he'd come. You'd have like the good firelighters, and then you'd have the Yellow Pack, and it was just boxed in a yellow box.
The Yellow Pack.
It was the Yellow Pack.
That was a Quinsworth thing.
It was a Quinsworth thing, yeah.
Lifestyle Sports used to be a Quinsworth thing.
Oh, really? Didn't know that.
Oh, a long history there. It's probably one for another episode. But yes, Lifestyle Sports originally part of Quinsworth.
But that would be, so this would be we're really doing a disservice to Amazon here now, but what you're suggesting is potentially
comparing Amazon to
potentially,
Quinsworth.
allegedly. Okay, moving along. But I do feel like if you had a magic wand, sometimes you might say, okay, well, what else could we do with the brand, maybe, in terms of getting into those other areas.
I suppose then, if you think about what Rich was talking about and actually having that kind of like that razor thin targeting, Amazon is from a product perspective, is as far away from the opposite in terms of its proposition, because obviously Amazon is the everything store and it's everything for everyone. I do wonder, how far can you stretch the product adjacency for the Amazon brand? I get it for biscuits. I get it for mice, as in a computer mouse, not as in like a pet mouse. But does it extend into fresh food? Would you trust it?
I definitely trust it. I'm just wondering, would I shop there? And I suppose maybe the fresh, my lettuce and those sorts of vegetables. So the other area, that we kind of touched on, was just the knowledge in the retail sector in terms of leveraging this tech. I feel like I think some of the tech is a good distance further along than I think the ability to use it is at. And maybe Maya mentioned a couple of times, for example, it took COVID before people would pull out their mobile phones and scan QR codes and that sort of thing. And obviously we saw an enormous step change during COVID in the use of tech and the speed at which businesses were making decisions, and to get on board with new delivery models or new fulfillment models that let's say even a month previously they would have put a 6-month plan together in order to do click and collect. All of a sudden overnight they were pushing it out, and making it work at Black Friday levels. But we're not going to have a Black Swan event Hopefully not a black swan event
I'm
every 2 years to start seeing step changes in the adoption of technology.
Yeah, I'm kind of done with black swan events.
Yeah, me too.
I'm good to not
White
have
swans,
so many of them.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is really interesting that Maya referenced is order management systems and some of the sophistication that can be built into order management systems to allow retailers to get the most value out of their inventory. Love that.
Yeah.
And I like that there's applications that can be swapped in and out to enable that for retailers. I think that's a brilliant piece of capability that I would like to see more of in use.
I like that framing of how do you extract value from your inventory, because really, while it's on the shelves of your warehouse, you have no value. You've extracted nothing from it. You've put money into it. It's an investment waiting to be realized.
Yeah.
And how the more ways that you're able to unlock access in terms of fulfillment and things like that, the quicker you'll get the full value of that investment.
The faster that you can turn that stock, the more you can get onto either replenishing it or moving on to the next season, depending on whatever business that you're in, and the more fun that's going to be for the buying team.
Well, I have to say that was a fascinating half an hour. I am absolutely, I'm overheated entirely at this point. Somewhere in the studio, so thanks so much.
It's positively tropical.
Yeah, thanks to our listeners. It's been lovely to have you again for another episode. And thanks, Gordon.
Thanks, Jer. Bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Functional and Fabulous with Jer Keohane and Gordon Newman. If you'd like to know more about the podcast or about Studio 49 and omnichannel stories, please go to functionalandfabulous.ie. Our sound engineer was Elaine Smith, and the show was produced by Roger Overall.